Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our first webinar of the PKU University. We are super excited for our first of many. And so today's webinar is going to be covering the Home Phe Monitor Update and Landscape. We have three wonderful panelists and presenters with us today. We have Elaina Jurecki, who is our Director of Research Development at the National PKU Alliance, along with Terrence Dunn of Allworth and Mike Boyce-Jacino with Aptitech. And I realize I didn't introduce myself. I am Catherine Warren. I am the Executive Director of the National PKU Alliance. So as we get started, so just wanted to say welcome. So the PKU University is going to be a series, so keep your eye out for the announcement for the next. We will have participation from industry partners, community subject matter experts, and topics will vary from things like today, focused on research, to frequently requested topics that we hear from the community. So sports and PKU, tips for travel and camp, mental health, and more. If you have a topic that you are interested in hearing about, please send us an email at info@npkua.org, and we will see if we can fit it in. For today's meeting, we will go through our slides, and then we will have time for Q&A at the end. As you can see, I think chat is disabled, but if you'll put any questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to as many as we can. And before I hand it over to Elaina, I'm super excited to share, we can tell even just from the amount of people that registered for today's webinar, over 115, the Home Phe Monitor is something that is so important to the PKU community. And so we are proud to share that over the last year, the National PKU Alliance has committed $500,000 to support two companies that are actively working in this space and who have both actually tested on PKU blood. No surprise, our guest today with Allworth and Aptitech. So we are excited to partner and invest with these two companies to support them, hopefully get across that finish line. So Elaina, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Catherine. Glad to be with all of you at PKU University and kick it off with an overview of the Home Phe Monitor landscape. So what I'd like to share with you is a general overview of Home Phe monitors, the regulatory FDA approval process, some of the challenges. Why don't we have a Home Phe monitor today, you're all asking? Well, we'll talk about some of those challenges and then give you a brief overview of companies that are working on the monitors. So current approaches, of course, we all know the PKU guidelines recommend regular monitoring of blood phenylalanine levels. And in order to do that, you either go to the lab, you get a venipuncture, which is a needle in the vein in your arm, and then the blood that's collected gets sent to a special lab to be analyzed. Alternatively, you can do a finger prick, and you have to put that blood spot on a filter paper card. It then gets dried and mailed to a lab for analysis. So what are the challenges? Well, typically it takes 2 to 3 weeks before you get those results. And I know there's some clinics that only take 2 to 3 days, and you're the exception, not the rule. So be thankful if you have a shorter waiting time. You got to make an appointment, and you got to travel to that lab to get the blood draw for the venipuncture. And the finger prick isn't as easy as it sounds. I remember back in the days when I was in the clinic, you have to have a really good size prick to get a good amount of blood, a good drop of blood. You have to be careful not to touch the filter paper. You have to make sure it dries, and then you have to send it. And the most frustrating thing is when you send it off and you come back, you're waiting for your results, and they say specimen is inadequate. And you're like, darn it, got to do it again. So that's frustrating. And it's hard to make treatment changes when you don't get a result for several weeks or a couple of weeks to go and think about what you did retrospectively. So with the home blood Phe monitoring devices, they're typically going to be portable instruments. There we go. They'll have software that's going to be accessible via a mobile app, and they'll have a disposable self-use cartridge for the blood sample collection. This will allow for self-testing, but it's still according to your healthcare provider's recommendations. Will typically require about 15 to 30 minutes to do the test, and it really is conducive to allow for more frequent blood Phe testing. But your healthcare team is still involved. They're going to decide the frequency of the test. They're going to help provide guidance in how to use the device, interpreting your blood test results, any treatment changes with the results of your blood. And ideally, some of these devices will be able to transmit the blood test results directly to the healthcare team, so they're also getting that information. There's also, somebody's playing around with the, okay. And also just to be aware, the device and the disposable cartridges will only be available by prescription. Okay, so what about glucose self-monitoring? And I brought this up because many years ago, people had to go, it's the same situation as monitoring your phenylalanine levels in the clinic. They had to go to the lab to get their glucose levels monitored. And eventually they were able to develop these glucometers that allowed for self-management and to test your glucose levels at home. And so there was a chart review when they developed these glucometers. People weren't sure, are they really going to help improve my glucose control? Is this really a necessary addition to my management? And so they looked at over 24,000 people in the Kaiser Permanente system in California, and they looked at all different types of diabetes. There's a type 1 that requires insulin, there's a type 2 that requires insulin, type 2 on oral agents, and a type 2 on diet. And they wanted to see if testing more frequently improved the hemoglobin A1C. And the hemoglobin A1C is like your long-term indicator of blood Phe control. And they wanted to see if you had better, glucose control. If you had better glucose control, if you tested more frequently. And as you can see, on all types of diabetes, the more frequent that they tested, you clearly see better, lower hemoglobin A1Cs, which means better glucose control. And this was a slide that that Dr. Marky McNutt, an endocrinologist at UT Southwest, shared with me. And he then went on and shared that not only do you see better glucose control, as demonstrated on this slide, but it also led to better outcomes. Individuals that tested more frequently had lower incidence of kidney disease and eye disease, which are typical complications of diabetes. So it clearly worked quite well in diabetes. And then in another slide that Dr. McNutt had shared, there were 5 patients at a PKU camp, and they were allowed to check their blood phenylalanine levels whenever they wanted, and then they got the results back the same day, and they could make dietary adjustments based on those blood test results. So what happened? Well, as you can see, as they tested on this daily basis, their phenylalanine levels proceeded to decrease over the course of the week. And, one caveat that I have to say is that typically at a camp, you also work with counselors, you have access to a lot of low protein foods, which also contributed to the lowering blood phenylalanine levels, but it does give an indication that testing more frequently could potentially help improve metabolic control. So what are some of the benefits for using home Phe monitors? Well, as mentioned, you can do more regular testing to manage your metabolic control and may be able to improve your blood Phe levels and your overall control. It could greatly facilitate moms with PKU during their pregnancies because, typically the recommendations are to get blood tests on a weekly basis. It can help give you a better understanding of the symptoms that you might be experiencing and whether or not it's related to phenylalanine. I hear very frequently individuals that say, yeah, I get these headaches. I don't know if it's my Phe level, but if you could test a Phe level, you might be able to see if it's related or not. it'll allow you to monitor more closely when there's a medication change or a diet change. And as a consequence, you can make more prompt changes in your treatment to address blood phenylalanine changes. It will help give us better understanding of how often phenylalanine levels fluctuate in the blood and what a goal blood phenylalanine level is. Just like with any other condition, it's not one size fits all, and everybody needs to tailor their treatment to be specific for them. And it will make it more convenient to participate in clinical trials. In many instances, they have long-term extension studies that require ongoing blood phenylalanine testing. And if you could do this at home, just think of how much easier it will be. And it'll allow a better correlation of those blood phenylalanine levels with the study outcomes. So this could be a great addition to clinical trials. And just like the glucometer testing in diabetes, where they realized a lot of unexpected benefits, I believe that we're going to see the same thing with home blood Phe monitors. So how come we don't have any monitors today? Well, the FDA has a pretty rigorous regulatory review process, and rightfully so, because the last thing that they want to do is put a device out there that's unsafe, that gives inaccurate results, and could, lead to making really bad treatment decisions. So they have a very rigorous process. As you can see in this arrow, there's many steps along the way that the FDA reviews, and the developer has to fulfill these requirements. And if you look at all the days involved, this is about a year of review on the FDA side, but it also takes many years for the developer to fulfill all of these requirements here. So as mentioned, these devices do require FDA approval, but the FDA is trying to facilitate this as much as possible. There's a de novo approval pathway since no devices currently exist, or there's a 510K designation pathway. And they have a breakthrough designation where they'll allow for priority review, AKA they get to move to the front of the line, and they'll provide additional review resources because they realize it's important, and they're trying to do their best to facilitate the review, but also to make sure that the devices that they're going to approve are going to be accurate and safe. The other thing that they do is, because these devices aren't diagnostic, they're not going to tell you that you have PKU. They're not going to give you medical guidance, okay? They just give you the blood phenylalanine result. This leads to a less rigorous regulatory approval process. And they're considered monitoring devices. So they have to show, the developers have to show that these devices are equivalent to what currently exists in clinical practice. So when you go through all the buckets that the FDA requires the developer to do, you see the verification test, where they have to show that the methodology works, and they have to show that it's sensitive across the whole range of blood phenylalanine levels from 1 to 20 milligrams per deciliter, so that it can accurately measure phenylalanine regardless of how low it is or how high it is. In the preclinical studies, in many instances, they're going to use blood that they spike with phenylalanine rather than using blood from individuals with PKU. And they do a lot of early testing, like, are the results going to be distorted if there's different tyrosine concentrations, or if the blood is at different concentrations, right? If you have more red blood cells in the blood, are the results going to be different? So they really have to look at different conditions to make sure that the device is accurately measuring phenylalanine. They also have to see if there's any medications or formula that could interfere with the device. And they have to make sure that the methodology that they're using to measure the phenylalanine is something that individuals with PKU can easily follow, because if it's more complicated, there's greater chances of errors happening, and that leads to wrong blood phenylalanine results. And then this information gets shared with the FDA, and then they'll test people with PKU and compare it to standard blood Phe testing approaches. They'll also have individuals with PKU do what we call test-retest, so that when they test their blood more than on 2 instances, that they're getting the same result. And that helps to understand if the device isn't too complicated, because if it's too complicated, they're going to have errors and their test-retest won't be the same. And it's also important that the device that they're going to use in the clinical trials is the device that they're using, because if they change that device, the FDA is going to require them to go through clinical trials again, because only the device used in the clinical trials is the device that gets approved. And then they'll submit this preliminary packet to the FDA for guidance on the clinical trial design. And then you got the clinical trials, and it typically has to be conducted at multiple centers, including people with PKU of all ages and all disease severities. And it's best to include individuals that are on different PKU medications and different formulas. And then finally, after many years of clinical trials, they'll submit this 510(k) application to the FDA, and then approval happens. Yay! But as mentioned, the healthcare provider can prescribe, has to prescribe it, the device and the frequency of use. But then also the developer has to ensure that insurance companies will reimburse for the device. So they have to make sure that this is something that's going to be paid for. And then in many instances, the FDA may require additional studies even after approval to demonstrate long-term safety and approval. So even after the approval, there's still more work that has to be done. So what are some of the challenges with developing the home Phe monitors? Well, funding is a big one, right? You need money to do the preliminary funding to show that this concept works, and then you need a lot of money to get it through all the steps through the FDA process. Manufacturing, preliminary devices that are used are typically not suitable for use at home, and so they have to finalize it and come up with a reasonable approach on how to manufacture it. The need to have a device that can test both ends of the spectrum. You know, their device needs to be sensitive between 1 and 5 milligrams per deciliter, as well as 15 to 20 milligrams. Spiked phenylalanine blood samples are very different than blood in individuals with PKU. So you may show a device that's great at spike samples, but when you come to measuring the blood in individual with PKU, it could be quite different. Regulatory device experts are definitely recommended to help get through the FDA process. And then recruitment of PKU participants in clinical trials can take quite a bit of time. So I'm going to really go through very quickly the home Phe monitor companies that are currently developing monitors, and there's quite a few, which is good news. And you know, and the NPKUA has been working with all of them and helping to support their development. So this one is in vitro diagnostic solutions. They're using an enzymatic assay to measure blood phenylalanine levels. The results can be transmitted to your cell phone and displayed on their PKU Now app. And they've done numerous trials in their preclinical submission packet on blood spike with Phe, and they're getting ready to start clinical trials in hopes of approval in the next year or so. And Robert Harper is the founder and the CEO of this company. EGO is another enzymatic analysis methodology to measure blood Phe, and they have actually conducted blood Phe testing on individuals with PKU at the metabolic camp this past summer at Emory University. They currently have their instrument available for research use only at this time, but they're still working on trying to get FDA approval, and Peter Wardhall is the founder. There's 2 other companies, Kilio Health and Amaroon, and they're also working on home blood Phe monitors. They are affiliated with very key medical institutions, and they do have experience in developing other monitoring devices. And they're in the process of securing funding and conducting laboratory research, and we are regularly communicating with them. And then one other, Circa Bioscience, who has been working closely with Greenwood Genetics Center, and they're using urine, which is kind of different because what they're looking at are phenylketones that correlate with blood phenylalanine levels. And currently, this picture really demonstrates how the original prototype that they're using to show proof of concept is very complicated and not anything that you could take and use at home. So they're in the process of developing a more facilitated home instrument, and in hopes of getting this instrument approved in a few years, and they still have to conduct clinical trials. And Robert Latour is the founder of this company and a grandfather of a PKU child. So our other 2, since we're short on time, I'm going to zip through, and Aptitech and Allworth with Michael Boyce-Jacino and Terrence Dunn are both here to talk about their company. So I'm going to hand it over to Terrence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elaina. That was very informative. Thanks. So thanks for the opportunity to present our company, Allworth Diagnostics, and our low our lead product, our home Phe monitor for PKU. Okay, slides are not moving for me. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Is that move for everybody else? Great. So Allward Diagnostics is based in Dublin, Ireland, and we have a portfolio of genetically engineered enzymes that have very unique analytical performance. And we're using this range of enzymes to develop home monitoring test solutions for a range of inherited metabolic disorders, from PKU to galactosemia to homocystinuria to glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. But our home Phe monitor for PKU is our lead product. Okay. So just to briefly introduce our management team, the management team of Allward Diagnostics have extensive experience in the medical diagnostics industry, and between us, we have over 90 years of direct industry experience. Our chairman is a gentleman called Dr. Jim Walsh. He's a PhD trained scientist, and he sits on the board of a number of stock market listed public diagnostic companies. I myself also have a PhD. I got an MBA a couple of years ago, and I have over 20 years experience, predominantly in publicly listed medical diagnostic companies, and I've also worked in one or two other startups. Our Chief Scientific Officer is Dr. Suren Agajanian. Suren has over 35 years of experience in the development of enzymatic technologies and their application to healthcare. He's held numerous academic positions in Armenia, the University of Sheffield, in the UK, and here in Ireland, where he's been for about 20 years. So this is our solution. This is Allward Diagnostics home Phe monitor. Simple, accurate, and instant results. As you can see on the slide, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, this is our handheld meter, and we have a single-use test strip that sits inside the handheld meter. You do not need a cell phone to run a test. When you run a test, the test results appear on the screen, and the meter can be connected via a Bluetooth connection to our cell phone app, and all results transferred across to the app. Okay, and we use a very small 10 microliter sample volume of blood to generate a result in 2 minutes. Okay, so I just want to walk through the workflow of our test and demonstrate how simple and how user-friendly our workflow is. So step number one is you lance your finger. And because our sample volume is quite small at 10 microliters, this means that you can use a lancet that has a far smaller, less painful blade than the standard lancet that you would use for a dry blood spot. Step number two, you just wipe the first drop of blood away. And step number three, using our single-use sample collector, you collect 10 microliters of blood off the capillary drop on your finger, and you add that 10 microliters of blood to our sample port on our test strip, which is sitting inside the meter, okay? 2 minutes after you add the blood, the result will appear on the screen of our meter, and then you can connect via Bluetooth to our cell phone app, where results can be transferred across for tracking and trending over time. Okay, so our system has a number of key benefits that I will talk about in a minute. But before doing that, I just want to give some context in terms of where we are from a product development perspective. Elaina gave a very good summary of the long product development cycle, and we're currently in that product development cycle. We already have a fully functional prototype that works and works very well. And we're now fundraising to bring that prototype that we have, a prototype that we've taken to the clinic and tested in PKU patients, generating excellent results. And we have to bring that prototype through the regulatory process in order to get regulatory approval to launch the product in the US and internationally. So in addition to the strong positive clinical data that we've generated in the PKU clinic, our product has a number of key advantages or benefits related to our very user-centric product design, and also our choice of underlying technology, our enzyme technology, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And then I suppose based on the experience of our management team, we're taking a very specific approach to product development and the configuration of our business model that will reduce regulatory risk, reduce operational risk, and ultimately it will deliver the best-in-class unit costs for when the product reaches the market. Okay. So from a management team perspective, we've been in this industry a long time, and we have seen some examples of products being developed over the years that really struggle to fit with the day-to-day practical life of users, okay? People in the PKU community have very busy lives at school, at college, working in industry or public service. So we wanted to develop a very user-centric and the most user-centric product possible. Because our product uses enzyme technology, and because enzyme technology is actually a very mature, well-characterized technology, we've been able to design a product that puts the user experience at the center of our product design. And consequently, we've developed a product with a 2-minute test time. We will have room temperature storage of our test strips. We have an ultra low sample volume of 10 microliters. And in addition to that, our handheld system is very portable. It weighs less than 4 ounces, so it's not a burden to bring around with you no matter where you go. You don't need your cell phone to run a test on our system, but after you do run a test, all results can optionally be transferred to the cell phone for tracking and trending. So not only does enzymatic technology provide us with a very flexible technology to develop a user-centric product, enzymatic technology has numerous other advantages. So if you ask yourself, and Elaina talked about blood glucose testing, if you ask yourself, what is the most established home self-testing market in the world? And the answer is blood glucose testing in diabetes. Millions of tests every year. And these blood glucose tests are run on an enzyme technology. And what that means is that enzyme technology is tried, tested, and proven the world over to be the appropriate technology to support self-testing in the home. So we have very significant, very strong market technology fit, okay? Enzyme technology is not only used for blood glucose testing. In fact, it's one of the primary technologies underpinning the medical diagnostics industry globally and has been for decades. If you walk into any lab in the US today, you'll find tests using enzyme technology. And this means that there's hundreds of enzyme tests that have been approved by the FDA and other international regulatory agencies. So from a product development perspective, this means that enzyme technology is very well understood by FDA and by the regulators and represents a far lower regulatory risk when developing new products. I think in terms of manufacturing, there's some advantages as well. A lot of investment globally has gone into manufacturing platforms for enzyme tests for blood glucose. We've taken an approach to manufacturing our tests whereby we can use a lot of those platforms off the shelf, meaning that we don't have to develop expensive, highly customized manufacturing processes. Okay. And finally, enzyme technology is very flexible and provides numerous options to support a long-term multi-generational product roadmap. Okay. So home Phe monitoring today is done by dry blood spot testing on a large lab analyzer. We've applied our enzyme technology to our colorimetric platform. We could also apply that enzymatic technology to a smaller electrochemicals platform. But if we think into the future and we think about what has happened in diabetes monitoring, we now have continuous glucose sensors that continuously measure blood glucose for diabetics. Okay. Those sensors use enzyme technology. So our enzyme technology could potentially in the future be used to develop a continuous Phe monitor for PKU and for phenylalanine monitoring. So I mentioned earlier that we don't need your cell phone to run our test, but you can run our test using a test strip and the meter. But by transferring the results to your cell phone and to our cell phone app, you can significantly enhance the long-term Phe monitoring and the capabilities of our system. I think the obvious benefits here are around tracking and trending results over time, or with the development of some new artificial intelligence technologies, potentially there may be the option in the future to predict fluctuations in Phe level or understand on a really highly personalized individual basis the different factors that affect your own Phe level. I think another potential benefit of transferring results to the cell phone app, it opens up the potential to instantly share your results with your healthcare providers and even move into facilitating telehealth appointment with your healthcare provider. So I suppose the key takeaways, in terms of this communication, Number one, we have a very experienced management team that know this industry back to front. We've spent our careers developing new diagnostic products and getting them through regulatory approval processes. We have a working prototype that we've taken to a large European clinic and tested in patients, generating really strong, really good results. We've multiple user-centric product features. We've built our product on an enzyme technology that's tried, tested, and proven the world over in blood glucose testing. And again, using the experience of our management team, we're configuring our product development process and our business model to minimize regulatory operational risk and optimize our unit costs. And in addition to the home Phe monitor, we also have our cell phone app that potentially, with the advent of new technologies, will have huge potential to enhance the tracking and trending of blood Phe. So finally, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time. Thanks very much to the NPKU for the opportunity to present our product to the community. And I would just encourage you all maybe to go to our website over the next couple of days or next couple of weeks, and using the contact us section, feel free to ask any questions you have, or if you have any ideas that you'd like to consider in terms of integrating into the app, we'd be delighted to hear them. And once you reach out, we'll put your details into our database and keep you updated on progress over the months and years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Terrence. We did get one question in our Q&A, and
Sure.
the question is, would this device be able to be used in infants?
Sorry, in infants.
Infants,
Yeah.
babies, little babies.
From a technical perspective, the measurement of phenylalanine in neonatal blood is very similar to adult blood. Neonates tend to have a higher hematocrit, so you have to pay some consideration to that. I think really it's a regulatory question. To get regulatory approval for neonates or infants or young children, you know, the bar is quite high. It would be our intention to have our product accessible to the entire community, but it ultimately comes down to what requirements the FDA will expect to see to allow us to market the product to neonates and infants.
Okay, great, thank you. With that, let's move on to Michael Boyce-Jacino to talk about Aptitech. And just a reminder, please, everybody, submit your questions in the Q&A. So, and then as soon as Michael's done his presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. So please get your questions submitted. Take it away, Michael.
Great, thank you very much, Elaina. And thanks, Catherine, for the opportunity to speak today. Let me go forward here. So let me talk about our system and kind of where we're at on the development process. So the system is shown here, which is a reader, which is battery powered and Bluetooth enabled to kind of sit on the countertop. A test cartridge, which is a lateral flow format cartridge and has a lateral flow detection strip. And the cell phone app to allow the user, provide a quick reference guide to the user on running the test and allow display of the results and sharing of those results to your healthcare provider. So we talked a lot about, and Elaina kind of went over this and Terrence touched on it as well, you know, why and what kind of features these systems have to have, particularly for the PKU community specifically, but also in general for home monitoring. So we want a simple but quantitative and sensitive sample collection strategy, a relatively simple data collection process through the reader and reporting strategy on the reader itself or through a cell phone app. So our goal is to use DNA aptamers to allow us to do direct detection of and quantitation of the target small molecule, in this case phenylalanine, in the blood. So we use 5 microliters of blood, and we use blood, of course, because it allows more reproducible quantitation, we believe, than other sample types for this kind of monitoring. And the reader is intended to allow us to capture a lot of information on the process itself to ensure the accuracy and reproducibility of the results. And the smartphone app gives us the ability to really assist the patient in analyzing that data and sharing that data as required and capturing that information as well. So the intent is to have real-time results with clinical quality data, simple workflow, and a chemistry that's robust. And kind of as Terrence alluded to, the importance on these platforms is to be able to add additional tests as we go forward. So that's part of that design. So the components are shown here. The aptamer detection is a direct binding of the DNA aptamer to the phenylalanine. So the system is really just designed to allow us to interpret and measure that binding event. And it's direct binding, so we have a quantitative relationship of the binding event on a 1-to-1 ratio to the amount of phenylalanine in the blood. So the 5 microliters of blood is collected via a finger stick, and on the cap of the cartridge, there's a collection site which will capture a 5 microliter sample of blood, which is diluted into a buffer containing the detection components. And then that is incubated and separated out on the lateral flow strip. So we use lateral flow because this is a ubiquitous readout format. There's many billions of these manufactured a year, so it's a high volume, low cost platform and very familiar to many users. And the reader then allows us to quantitatively measure that result. So it's direct fluorescent detection of that readout in the reader here. The reader will interpret that result. It'll determine via the barcode if that's a PKU test or a tyrosine test or other type of test, and ensure that it's not a previously used test sample, for example. And also the reader is connected to the phone so that it's your reader and your phone for HIPAA compliance. It's kind of your system. Nobody else can use your same system to get a result and ensure the integrity of that data that's collected and then shared with your healthcare provider. So the reason we're doing this detection on phenylalanine, there's a lot of different approaches, and we're touching, Elaina touched on them earlier, but we want to measure directly the amount of phenylalanine. And the challenge is they're small molecules. And as Terrence said, for some of these, ideally, you can do enzymatic detection as well. But for many other targets, really, you can't. Hormones and antibiotics, small molecule therapeutics, things like this. So we wanted to develop an overall platform that allows us to measure these small molecules directly without enzymatic detection requirements. So we have a broad menu of targets. And phenylalanine is a great model system for this. So the DNA aptamer is designed to specifically bind phenylalanine, and really, when it bound, it releases a fluorescent signal, which, as I mentioned, is directly correlated with the amount of phenylalanine. So this is a core intellectual property for the company, which is a nice platform for us to develop other tests on. And the goal is that it gives us equivalents to LC-MS or mass spectrometry tests, which are done in the central lab, for example, for phenylalanine. So the platform itself, as I mentioned, right now is lateral flow. We can adapt it to electrochemical sensing. A lot of research-based aptamer detection is via this method, which is the test strip looks like a kind of like Terrence was talking about for blood glucose. And long-term, we can do more complex array detection for IP that we have around array-based sensors, which are electrochemical sensors formats. So the idea is that this chemistry can be adapted as we go forward to more complex panels of tests. So the workflow we talked about, which is captured via the cap of 5 microliters of blood, assemble that onto the test cartridge, and allow that to be incubated and read in the reader. And the cell phone app really just walks you through all the steps required, again, to ensure that this is your reader and your cell phone connected with fingerprint or code authentication of the system, and then reporting in milligrams per deciliter or micromolar, and with your healthcare provider color coding that so you know what your target range is. Since this is a spectrum disease, everybody's got sort of a target range within the broad range of phenylalanine concentrations amongst the patient population. So you can target and identify the regions in which you want to have your blood phenylalanine kind of optimally targeted. And that's just going to run through there. So one long-term thing that we want to do with this system is provide a home health hub basically for this reader so that it's easy for the user to share that data automatically. In the case of clinical trials, a lot of the interest is to be able to capture that data in real time automatically for patients participating in the trials. And then, of course, provide feedback to the patient in terms of reminders if their clinical care team wants them to make an appointment, get prescription refills, et cetera. So this is going to be kind of the long-term strategy for the system, and it allows us to communicate directly with home portals like Amazon Dot and Google and things like this. But most of the focus, of course, is the patient using the system in real time to monitor their results. So we've done a lot of work on cross-reactivity and interference and performance of the system. I just want to show you a couple of quick highlights. Basically, one of the things is, of course, biosimilar compounds which may cross-react. So we want to make sure that other things like tyrosine don't interfere or cross-react, dopamine, norepinephrine, et cetera. We also want to look to make sure that the system has sensitivity across the clinical range. So the idea is to ensure linearity from basically 0 to 1600 because some new therapies, of course, reduce the amount of phenylalanine, kind of the opposite of having PKU is kind of having really low phenylalanine in the blood. So we want to be able to monitor patients under those newer therapies as well to ensure that their phenylalanine is within their target range, kind of down in this zone here. So we need linearity across that range. We've done 2 usability studies with patients as part of the preclinical work for the FDA submissions. And part of that is surveying usability responses. So we had really good responses across the board on ease of use and interpretation of the results and things like this, which is good news, and shared that information with the FDA. Also on our preclinical study, so we have breakthrough status with the FDA, which allows us to kind of communicate with them on a lot of these early stage steps and share our clinical plan with them and get feedback on system use and design and qualification within the clinical trial. So on the preclinical study we did with Jerry Vockley's team at Pittsburgh, we recruited patients which ranged in age from 10 years old to in their 50s, and patients who were on newer therapies, Kuvan, Palynziq, patients who were only managing through diet, and some patients who were self-managing off diet as well. So we try to get a range of patients across the board in the preclinical study, and we had the patients come in multiple times if they were able to look at reproducibility of performance of the system as well, and their ability to learn on it. So the patients were trained on the system by the clinical care team and then observed running the system themselves. And then we compared those results with their results from dried blood spots as well as venous blood draws to look at performance of the test across the system. So I'm not going to show all that data here today. Happy to talk about that if people are interested. Here I'm just showing some summary data ranked by their concentration of blood Phe, comparing their dried blood spots in blue to our system being tested in red. And so we had really, really good results, and we shared this information with the FDA in anticipation of the clinical trial and how we were going to do the comparison. And I think Elaina alluded to that. It's really important to have a comparator set up that the FDA is comfortable with. Even though you're not diagnosing and you are monitoring, they still are really concerned that the results you're getting are equivalent to what the patients currently get, and that clinical care providers understand and can trust those results. So if there's a question, we could talk a little bit about that as well. But we had really, really good results, and a lot of the feedback was, of course, their goal is to have us cover all comers. So we from very, very young children to adults to women who are pregnant and this sort of thing. So we're incorporating that into the clinical trial plan. And this is just a summary of where we're at with this. Is really we've submitted our trial plan to the FDA and done some additional review with them. So we're just gearing up to do the clinical trial today. And as Elaina said, it's obviously these things are expensive and time consuming, partly because of just the logistics of doing the trial, but also the preparation and regulatory requirements for the trials themselves. So it takes always longer than any of us hope through these steps with the FDA, but we're moving at a good pace. On our team, just very quickly, we have a great team. And I think, as Terrence was alluding to, it's really important to have a good support team who have experience in commercialization of these products and also the clinical expertise to bring these products to market. So we're excited about that and looking forward to moving the product to the market soon. And with that, I will say thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. Great presentations, Terrence and Michael. And we do have a number of questions. So thank you very much. And please submit your questions via the Q&A. This is your opportunity to ask Terrence, Michael, and myself if you have any questions. So please submit them. And the first one is asking if there's any forecast for the date of general availability. Are we 2 to 5 years out? Michael and Terrence, why don't you both take a stab at that?
Yeah, I can go ahead and give a quick answer and then if that's okay. So we are with our current plan. The goal is, and I think Elaina alluded to a bit of that timeline. So sort of this time next year to certainly be on the market. That's the general plan right now.
Yeah,
Terrence?
so thanks for that. As I mentioned, we've taken a number of very deliberate decisions in the design of our product to make the product development process as swift as possible. One of those is that we're using a meter that's already been regulatory approved. So I'd say we're probably talking in the 24 to 36 month window, give or take.
Okay, great. Another really good question is how often do you anticipate needing to service or recalibrate this type of equipment, and will this be a costly requirement?
I'll jump in on that one first, maybe then. So it's our calibration check. You don't have to recalibrate our equipment. It's very simple. There's a calibration strip comes with the device. You can do it. There's no extra cost. So it's a very simple process with our type of colorimetric platform.
And likewise, the system self-calibrates every time you turn it on. So, and it has built in a 5-year lifespan. So basically, it's very stable and easy to use. And if it flags anything, it's easy to replace the unit. It's designed to be kind of a low-cost system where you just basically say it flags a certain error. If it, in worst case, had that, someone dropped it on the floor or something, you can get another one very quickly.
Great. And we have another question for Allworth. Since you're based in Dublin, hard to, with that accent, we knew you weren't US, but anyway, the question is, are there any implications or challenges with getting FDA approval here in the US?
No, there isn't. There's a large number of FDA registered manufacturing facilities in Ireland, both for pharmaceuticals and medical devices, all of which would have developed and have full FDA regulatory approval, both through PMAs and 510Ks with the FDA. So there's no challenge around that.
Okay. Oh, this is a great question. As a mom of 3 PKU children, would one device work, or are you going to need a separate device for each child? Terrence, you want to start, and then Michael jump in?
Yeah. So I think one of the advantages of our system is you don't have to connect to your cell phone app. So from that perspective, one of our system could be used for multiple siblings. I think if you want to have an app account for each one of the siblings, I think it gets potentially a bit more complex there. And we're looking at ways from a data transfer perspective to mitigate that, because there is, so many scenarios where siblings in the same family will have a need for a home fee monitor. You can absolutely use our system for multiple siblings because you don't need your cell phone to generate the result.
Okay.
Yeah, likewise. So the app is designed to accommodate that. So as a caregiver, you can identify individuals that you're testing because you're managing the testing. And when they're old enough and you want them to test themselves, they can likewise have their cell phone set up to accommodate that within the family. So.
Okay. We have a question about if somebody in the community wants to sign up and be considered a participant in the clinical studies. And we have another question also on how can we join the clinical trials. So this is exciting. Maybe both of you can share that, because looks like we have some enthusiasm in this audience.
Yeah, I'll just mention quickly. So we will, if you look at clinicaltrials.gov, as that's announced, and we'll share that information with the community through NPKUA as well when we have the trial set up, but you'll see on clinicaltrials.gov as well where those sites are. So because it's on the FDA side, of course, we have to select a specific clinical partners to manage the testing. But when we did this at NPKUA, we talked about and came up with a strategy. So if people within the general community who may be under the care of another clinical provider could participate, and we were able to set that up with the clinical trial plan that the FDA approved. So the short answer is yes, you can join the trial, and that information will be available once we've reviewed that with the FDA.
Yeah, very similar, very similar answer from us. The only thing I would add is if you have an interest and you want to reach out and make contact with us, happy to hear from you through our website. And then when the time comes, depending on the FDA requirements in the trial site, potentially you could partake.
Okay, great. And there was another question on the feasibility or possibility of having your app with your blood test results integrate with other apps like the Flock app or the EHR. Probably EHR would be challenging. The electronic health medical record would be tough because of the security, but other apps that people use to manage their PKU, would there be any ability to import, export to these?
From just maybe if I jump in, if from a technical perspective, we've been very deliberate in terms of the technology choices we've made about the app in terms of not limiting its potential to integrate with other platforms going forward. So from a technical perspective, we have flexibility to integrate with a number of different platforms.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Likewise, it's very simple to share that data with Flock or other systems, and it's for HIPAA compliance. It has to be a push from the user, generally speaking, to ensure integrity of the data. But other than that, yes, very easy to do.
Okay, we have a few questions, rightfully so. People are interested on, the prospect of insurance paying for this. And maybe you both can, share what your thoughts about are on this, getting insurance coverage.
Yeah, so we've done quite a bit of work, both from a European insurance reimbursement perspective and the US. I think one thing that strikes us pretty immediately when we look at the reimbursement landscape in the US, that the cost for dry blood spot testing is actually quite high. So I think there's a lot of flexibility to get home fee monitor reimbursement in the US based on that alone. And that's without building in the other clinical benefits to having an instant result. So I think there is potential there, but there's quite a bit of work maybe to be done to ensure full reimbursement.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add to that, we've had some discussions with the insurers that to kind of educate them on the system and cost of the system, cost of testing as we anticipate it, and potential for reimbursement using current CPT codes and things like this. One of the challenges, as NPKUA knows well in dealing with insurance providers, is it's a rare disease. They're not always as familiar as we would like on reimbursement for rare diseases or where it all fits into their care plans. So that's part of it, is just educating them on this and the importance to the community. But we haven't seen any real pushback yet on reimbursement at the high level. So that's good news. And we're working with a couple of programs here that allow us broader access, certainly through CMS and the insurers, to ensure that we have adequate CPT code and that sort of thing available when the product launches.
Great, thank you. And then another question here is, and this is a good question because, you know, I alluded to with the finger prick for the filter paper, you need a good amount of blood to saturate that. The question is, will the prick hurt, and is it similar to the one that currently exists for filter paper cards? And, you know, that goes back to the amount of blood that you're collecting for your devices.
Yes, so typically the lancet that you use, or the blade that's in the lancet that's used for dry blood spot testing, is quite painful, quite invasive, quite large. And because the volume of blood in our test and in Michael's test as well is a lot smaller than that, you could use a smaller lancet. There still is a minimum lancet requirement to generate enough blood to get the sample volume that we require. But in general, a smaller lancet can be used with our system. I don't want to speak for Michael.
Yeah, likewise. It's the smallest one, and like Terrence was saying, more like a blood glucose test, which is a very small lancet, and you're only doing one finger versus doing multiple fingers and lots of blood spots. So I think we're really well aligned on making this an easier test to do, for sure.
I love this question. They're asking you guys if they could do one-stop shopping. In other words, can your monitor also check blood glucose levels?
Good question.
From a technical perspective, the monitor that we have adopted for our test system can be used for other chemistries that are detected with an enzymatic technology. That includes blood glucose, triglycerides, cholesterol, things like that. We don't have an active focus on those at the moment. We're actively focused on inherited metabolic disorders and phenylalanine, but it can be done, yes.
Yeah, and likewise, I mean, part of the reason we chose the lateral flow readout, at least for this, was it's easy to add those. And we do have aptamers for most other sugars and a number of other targets like that. And there's room on the system to certainly add additional tests. So yes, it's quite easy and straightforward. And these are designed to be open platforms for additional tests to be done on the same sample or at the same time.
Well, great. Well, we're wrapping up. We're coming to the end of the hour. There were a few questions about frequency of testing. Will I need a prescription? And you definitely will need a prescription to be able to get this device. And in terms of how often you can test, that will be up to you and your healthcare provider. Your healthcare provider will be providing information on how often they want you to test. Also, there was a question about whether or not these companies could integrate the blood testing with the PKU patient registry. And I was wondering if you guys could quickly respond there. Sorry, I missed that question that I just got asked.
Yeah, from a technical perspective, that's absolutely possible with our system. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This was a very, very informative and helpful PKU University. I also believe that we recorded this event, and this will be available so that people that would like to go back to listen, because it was so informative. You know, I know I'm going to, because I think Terrence and Michael, you shared some really good information, and you know, it's very helpful to go back and listen. And also, I really appreciate all our audience and asking such great questions. That was really helpful. And stay tuned. We're going to be doing many more of these. So thank you very much, and have a great day and have a great week.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Likewise, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Great to present, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye now.